So we asked the Executive Committee of the DFA and others to come up with a few questions which they would like to ask the board, a board member, about board discussions and considerations of topics of concern. Some of these have already been discussed over the course of the day, which might help one or two with their answers. But I will hand over to Ian to chair.
Thanks for the opportunity to just spend a few minutes with you. The board members have been floating around for over yesterday and today, and I think it's just another example of the community that's developed between the board, between the DFA executive, the executive from DINZ, and most importantly for you as farmers and the supporting industries there. So. To make it a little bit easier, we've Innes and I think John Somerville have probably set up some just one or two questions that each one can answer briefly, and on some reasonably topical sort of stuff. So we'll start with I think we might start with Mark. Where is he? Down there. And the question he was given is, with the high hind kill that is underway at the moment, the national herd is shrinking. What strategies will the board put in place to address the reduction in revenue and reverse the decline? That's a big subject.
Bloody hell.
2 minutes.
In 2 minutes, yeah. Are both these working? No. Can you hear me on that one? Yeah. Cool. Yeah, big question. I guess when I first joined the board and came to a conference and saw what I thought was an industry that was going pretty well. You know, there'd been the story of the growth of the market in Europe, diversification into the USA, and you know, some initial activity in China, and we're all thinking, heck, this is real good stuff. We're getting diversified markets. The velvet side was growing as well, and things are looking pretty awesome. And then COVID's hit, and there's been a lot of discussion about that in the last few days. And I don't know how many of you guys in the room anticipated COVID and the shutting down of the world's restaurants. I don't think anyone would put their hand up and honestly think that was even possible. So, but the good thing about it is that we understand what's happened and why. And that's always the start of solving a problem. I like the term superfood as opposed to minority protein too, by the way. So I reckon words are important. But the one positive out of all this is that when we make change, we only really make change when times are bad. If everything's going tickety-boo, we just keep on doing what we're always doing. But what we've seen today, I think, is some fantastic initiatives that are underway. And there's been a lot of major changes over this COVID thing, and you know, I just wanted to reflect on a couple of those. And one is the change in the way we do business around the world and the way we communicate. You know, the digital technology and the use of Teams. You know, we've got people dialing in from different countries to attend the conference, sort of in person, virtually. And that's pretty commonplace, but it's not even a surprise to us, whereas it would have been just 18 months ago. And you've seen the emergence of digital sales channels and online retail. It's unbelievable, the explosion of the use of digital to overcome the challenges of not being able to, you know, to be face-to-face as much. So a huge trend. The other one is counter cyclical investment. The best time to invest is when times are bad, because that's when you can drive this change that I was talking about just before. And I was really, really pleased to hear from the 5 meat companies this morning, and they're all making the investments at the moment in these hard times to try and to further broaden the way we go to market. So I thought that was pretty cool. The First Light Steak Club, neat initiative. The Alliance guys with targeting that bison market, I thought that was pretty exciting. The Duncan guys targeting retail and e-commerce in addition to what they've been doing before. Mountain River and their force of nature, and also some of that high-end retail stuff that they're doing. And then, of course, Silverfern Farms. I don't know, they're definitely smoking something in their rooms, because Project Moonshot and the Roosevelt initiative, I thought they were cool as well. So there's a lot of great initiatives that our marketing companies are taking on our behalf to try and diversify away from the food service now into retail and online. So I think that's most people have been catching up at this lunch break. They're all pretty excited about the fact that these initiatives are underway, and it's great to hear from them. So what is DINZ doing? Well, we heard from Nick. I was very excited to hear from Nick's presentation today, because he's really connected in that digital world. You can see some of the initiatives that he's driving and supporting the companies in doing that. So we've diverted the funds from in the P2P to support those retail initiatives in the US that I just sort of mentioned just then, that we heard about earlier. So that's been awesome, and Nick's been driving that work in the social listening and doing some advertising work up in the States as well, to support what we're trying to do in the US. You also heard about the China initiative, and the fact that we're spending some money out of reserves, and the Silverfern Farms, they were lucky enough to get hold of that cash to do that. So that's pretty exciting as well. And of course, there's a lot of work still going on up in the EU, and we're seeing a lot more. Nick is developing a lot more digital material to support the activities that are going on up there. Shipping, yeah, that is a risk, and I guess we've got a few months before that materialises, before hopefully that can sort itself out a bit by the time we get into peak season, and cross your fingers that by that time things will have settled down a bit. So I guess that's really the main things I wanted to say. And I think being at the conference, you can't help but be excited about the future, even though we're in pretty tough times. And I think when you're in tough times, you just tough it out and get through the other side, and we'll be a lot stronger for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. That was a good summary of the day. So it has saved me a job. Right. So the next one needs no introduction. Chris Orange, and I'll tell you the little topic that he's been given to. Does the board understand the level of risk that the proposed environmental legislation imposes on our industry? And does the board have the resources to represent the industry's concern? And do our farmers have the resources to cope with it? We'll give you 2 minutes, shall we?
Short answer, no. I've just jotted down a little bit of stuff, and we've heard quite a bit from Lindsay over the last day or so as well. But it is a frustration from farmers and the board that some of these rules seem to be forever evolving and changing. We're required to get GHG numbers that once we get our number, we don't know what that number will actually mean. So yes, it's something that the board talks about frequently is these types of regulations that are coming, and how we can help with small, as in comparison to the beef and lamb and so forth, and the levies. So we do a lot of collaboration. Lindsay's talking with beef and lamb a lot, and even in some of the online stuff that you see at beef and lamb, it's actually got figures for deer and so forth in there. So that's one way to make our dollar go a bit further. We've been banging on. David Morgan, I think, was the first one to bring up about farm environment plans and everybody getting them. That's we just need to get on and do that. We're getting. I think we worked out about 60% of farmers have that now, but we need to push on and get more done. So we've always taken as a board that the view that we would be inside the tent on any of these negotiations and any of these forums, such as the Hiwaka Noa. There's not much point really being outside the tent throwing stones, we don't think. And at this stage, we don't know. There's a lot of work to go on before we get even any numbers that we can actually deal with. And just some of the things for the environment, there are some pros and cons for deer. Like that, obviously, there's a big con there is that it's $25 a metre to fence with a permanent fence. But you could arguably say that maybe in down Southland here, deer are a lot better on the soil than the heavy cattle. So there are things like that. There's innovation that I think in the next few years could be quite exciting. Sort of virtual fences and that type of thing. So if we read up the rules and just make sure that we're actually thinking outside the square. Stock exclusion doesn't necessarily mean that there needs to be a permanent fence down each side of your creek. It's just about having that discussion all the time, and it's probably takes up, or it does take up a fair bit of our board's time. So we're fully aware of it. Thank you.
That's good. Thanks, Chris. I probably don't need to point out that the board is very well represented in terms of DFA representatives from the producers and also from the industry as well. And so you're now going to hear from Nigel, who's one of the processing marketing representatives on the board from Alliance. And the question he's been given is, it's interesting to find out that once you read these questions, you realise you don't have to necessarily talk about them, do you? So, how well placed is our industry to cope with the proposed greenhouse gas emission targets set by the government? Nigel, that's a hospital pass.
Well, thanks so much, and must admit it's a pleasure to be here. I've only joined the board late last year, so it's the first conference I've been to, but must admit certainly enjoying it, and it's good meeting so many representatives from across the sector. And I think that's important when we think about the greenhouse gas topic. When we talk about how well our sector, our industry is placed to handle it, it's not just the immediate on-farm stuff that we have to be thinking in this context. Now, what I'll talk about is primarily on the on-farm stuff, but I think we've got to think about this on a far broader scale as well, because it's not only the emissions on-farm we've got to be targeting and we've got to be looking at. Going forward, it's all sectors of our value chain are going to have to be looking at emissions. So whether it be the transport companies that are moving our product, whether it be the processors looking at alternative energy sources, or whether it be even some of our shipping company partners. Across the total value chain, emissions is an issue. So I think we obviously talk a lot here about the on-farm stuff, and that's highly applicable, but it is worth, I think, always appreciating this is a far bigger issue than just on-farm. When we look at across the on-farm stuff, and I think that for us it's a real priority that we should focus on the on-farm, because if we don't get on top of it, the reality is we won't be masters of our own destiny. If we don't drive the agenda within this sector, then very quickly we will find officials will tell us what is required of us. So in that, we've got some immediate short-term goals that we know we have to deliver against, and those goals being like, for instance, getting, we're aiming to get a quarter of our farms to have, a measure of their carbon green, the global, the greenhouse gases. We have that measure by the end of this year. We want 100% by the end of 2022. And then by 2025, the end of that, we've got to have all our farms having plans in place that aren't only just environmental plans at a high level, but they actually have mitigation efforts in place to look at the mitigation plans for reducing emissions as well. Now, I suppose it was quite interesting yesterday. It was quite reassuring yesterday. I think we did a show of hands. Someone called for a straw vote, and I think about 50% of farmers in the room actually put their hands up to indicate that they've already got a handle on their greenhouse gas numbers, which was, a real big step. It's probably a lot higher than I personally thought it would have been from the discussions we've had in previous sessions of the board and things like that. But it's really important as we do that, though, that the DINZ particularly starts to be really proactive in helping and supporting managing this for the industry and for the stakeholders here. So it's an area that the DINZ particularly has been quite active in. So we've had Lindsay, and we've heard from Lindsay a few times over the last couple of days, talking about the work that's underway with other interest parties. So we're working on the Iwaka Heka Noa group there. We're working with Beef and Lamb and Co. and MIA, looking at coming up with standards for measuring these emissions. And it's important we do that because the reality is probably 80% of our deer farmers are also beef and lamb farmers, etc. So whether it be yardstick, whether it be overseer or the ministry's own emissions scorecard that we decide to use, it's important that we actually take an approach that is relatively generic across all aspects of the farm. But once we get beyond that, and once we've got the measurements in place, that we can have confidence that the measure is robust, it's clear, and it's standard across multiple sectors of this industry, we then need to make sure we focus on far more deer-specific issues. Because when it comes to the mitigation of emissions, we've got to be very clear that that is where we potentially have quite big differences between deer and the likes of beef or the likes of sheep and lamb. And so for us, it makes a lot of sense to work with more of a collaborative environment with a lot of these big other partners. But what we've got to realise, particularly in the likes of Iwaka Heka Noa, we're one of 16 partners in that, and we're only a very small one. And equally, there's probably very little alignment in the mitigation strategies once we get out of that. So that's where I think in the near future, we've got to step up and we've got to get a lot more focus around those mitigation strategies, make sure we've got a lot clear around how it's going to be for the future state for our sector. So then we can go to the likes of the Climate Commission, demonstrate to them that we understand the topic, we're on top of the topic, and be able to demonstrate to them that we're doing all things practical to actually address the topic. Because it is only when we do that, then we will get absolute clarity and probably an element of final certainty as how close we are to meeting the standards and how far we potentially have to journey to get on top of the topic. And that's the key issue for us. There's a lot of unknowns out there, but we've got to make sure we get on top of those numbers in the front. We've got to make sure we apply something that is very robust and is accepted by a broad spectrum. And then we've got to make sure we take that deer-centric view of the world to make sure that as we sit down with that Climate Commission and things like that, and people like that, that we actually have got clarity and purpose and clear direction. And once we've got that, we can have an element of certainty as to whether we're going to be on top of the topic or not. But there's probably a lot of unknowns in the meantime. So I think we're probably doing as best as we can in that. We can have a reasonable confidence that the steps we're taking are good and they're in the right direction. But we've got to put a lot of effort into that next step about how do we mitigate it. Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks, Nigel. How are we going for time? Good?
2 or 3 minutes.
2 or 3 minutes each. Good. That was so. The next one is Tony, who needs no introduction to anybody either, I don't think. And his topic is very brief. How is the board getting feedback on all the concerns at grassroots levels?
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, they obviously gave that grassroots one to me for a reason. And that made me think, well, maybe we should be just hiring a bus and doing a regionalised pub tour. But anyway, that's not the way the board operate. Obviously, amongst the board here, there's 3 DFA representatives, and amongst the group of 8, there'd be 5 that actually do own farms and operate their own farms. So, we're pretty close to the soil in that sense. One thing, we do have a general business section of the DINZ board meeting, and we take the concerns from the grassroots to the board table and make sure that we get them well covered off. So we're all aware of the real aspects of deer farming and what those issues are. Another thing is the DINZ board offer to go out into the regions or the local DFAs to engage with a meet the board night and actually answer those questions that are burning. And recently we visited Geraldine and Fairley. So I think that pretty much covers it off. Thanks.
Cheers. Yeah, thanks very much, Tony. We'll move on quickly. Jared will be the next one. The P2P spent 5 years targeting European food service. Now it is targeting the USA retail. What was the benefit of the European work?
I think someone stole my 2 minutes before, so this will be a short one. But as a marketer, I think in rainbows. The world is full of rainbows. And so there's sort of 3 layers, I think, as to why the board invested in the European chilled. So I think the first one is the top layer of the rainbow is camaraderie. And you heard it in the P2P before, camaraderie and collaboration to get the 5 marketers and their imported customers to actually work together on a common cause. I think as the first of the P2P market projects, it was real positive there. The second layer down is that it drove increased sales of chilled venison into the European market during summer, which hadn't been seen before. The key thing is it's chilled. Chilled means it's got to be consumed readily. So therefore we drove, I believe, a level of consumption in a time of the year that wouldn't normally typically have happened. And the bottom layer of the rainbow essentially is we drove sales. I don't know unless you can tell exact numbers, but it was over 100 tons of chilled venison per annum that was sold during a traditional time of the year when venison would not have been consumed. So camaraderie, collaboration, real sales, and we drove a consumption trend. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jared. Now there's 2 left. William, you're the next one. The Advanced Party program has been very successful, but the PGP funding finishes in 2022, which we've just heard from Phil. What's the board's view on continuing to fund a successor program?
Thanks very much. I'd just like to thank Phil and Mandy actually for doing my presentation already for me, so I won't go on about it too much. But when I first started with the board 6 years ago, that was the first thing we signed off on. My first board meeting was the current P2P, and we agreed then to draw down the reserves. So I think we've taken the reserves from just over 5 million down to about 1.5 million, and we increased the levy by about 2 cents a kilogram for venison, and that helped obviously pay for the P2P, and a part of that the advanced parties. So the board obviously are supportive, as Phil and Mandy pointed out, of continuing the P2P. It has been a big part of the overall vision of DINZ as a growing, healthy, industry, and so we're it's a big key part of our strategy. So I guess going forward, how it's going to be funded is going to be an interesting conversation, I suppose, going forward. But we are supportive. It's been really big, and I know just for my own 2 farms, the value it's added to for my managers, etc., has been huge. So thanks very much.
Thanks, William. And just in terms of continuity, I'll read out the hairy little line that I got as well. And then the last one will be Amy. Right, the statement given to me was, with Osprey planning to phase out TB testing for low-risk areas, is the board reassured that the vector control programs will be adequately funded to ensure we don't have TB creeping back? Recently, the Hawke's Bay outbreak showed how quickly things can deteriorate if one link in the vector control program fails. So just 2 or 3 points. The first thing I'd say is I think we'd probably all be quite happy if we didn't have to do too much TB testing. And I've certainly always been the advocate of that, provided we understand the risk factors that occur around about your farm. And the risk factors include what's going on in the area in terms of other farming operations, and also what's happened with the feral population in that area, which is the vector that can spread the disease. So and so I think moving as the incidence of infected herds dropped, it looked a more and more viable option. And don't forget, from a farm point of view, if you're killing animals, there's animals that are going through the meat inspection process all the time. So in actual fact, there is a way to pick up the infection there. But and so that's good. I thought that was that reasonable progress. And then boom, Hawke's Bay, and it's failed for all the reasons I've just talked about. So Osprey I think they've been a little bit remiss in terms of the vector control programs that would occur around that area. The infection has been smouldering around there since the late 90s. There was a major outbreak in the late 90s, which was cleaned up, then occurred again about 2007 and 2008. And then it's occurred again in the last couple of years or so. So I think that's a good example where you've got to be totally confident of the factors that the risk factors that you have, and for all intents and purposes, we thought that Osprey had good control of the feral population in that area, so in actual fact, the disease would be contained in that area, and that has clearly not been the case. So there's still a lot of things to work on, and just last night I got an email to say that the number of infected herds in that area has gone from 17 to 19. So we're not making much progress yet. So I'll leave my comment at that stage. And last but definitely not least, in fact, a record breaker. We've got Amy, who's was appointed as a board observer, and she's got the honour of being the first woman associated with the DINZ board. So well done for that. And she's going to just tell us why she put her hand up for that role.
I got told it was because I had hair and wasn't a middle-aged male, but so some background, I actually started as a vet in Southland, and it was great. I learned how to velvet and work with deer, but I didn't like the weather, so I have to say, so I moved a bit further north. But I've always worked with deer farmers, and I find it great, and I really enjoy it. And then I've over time become president of the deer branch, and it was just really interesting to be involved with DINZ because they always seem so proactive from my point of view, and it's really interesting, and I'm really enjoying it. It's completely out of my depth, and half the time I have no idea what they're talking about. But it's really great. So if anyone's interested, I'm more than happy to ask, if you've got questions, you're welcome to ask. And if you want to do it, put your hand up because it's a very awesome experience.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah. Thanks, Amy. That's really good because I believe that the board observer role, it's a 12-month appointment. It's available over the calendar year, and it's a really good opportunity for people just to have a look at what happens. And Amy is all the time involved in the discussions at all the board meetings and all the board activities. So she gets a really good understanding of what goes on, sees all the paperwork and all that sort of thing. So there's no there's nothing hidden.
Yeah, hi, this could be a question for any of you. The Canterbury branch is interested to know what your opinion is on re-looking at GMOs going ahead in the light of the environmental issues we're facing, might be able to help with emissions and that sort of thing.
So there's two parts of it. One's GM feeds, and the other might be the modification of the utilisation of GM. So the board's policy on GM at the moment is that whilst it's not, they're not actually available in New Zealand, GM pastures, so it's a fairly easy decision to make, but that in future, no technology should be ruled out if it proved efficacious in providing that kind of benefit, but only if it was acceptable to the markets that we supply. On that other question around the current standard around non-GM feeds for Savannah qualifying deer, we undertook a review of that midway through last year, and both the farmers who were consulted on that and also all of the marketing companies were unanimous on the benefits of keeping that GM exclusion in place. sorry, not all of the farmers were in favour of it, but the vast majority were. So that is still in place.
Yeah, the question is around this know your number. Okay, so we get to know our number, know what our cost is, or when we get the final reading on it. The transport industry get their cost, the processor gets their cost, and the exporter get their cost. Now, you've all heard about the trickle-down effect. So who's the payer? So we know who the payer is, eh? The payer is the poor old dear that's going off to the works in a truck, paying his percentage for the trip to there. He's paying the people at the works. He's paying that. So as a producer, are we going to get the return of an eyeball, or are we going to get something else? Like it's all these things add up, and it's usually only the supplier that ends up with the bill.
Yeah.
So how are you going to handle that?
It's a good question, and Lindsay's a man who's all over that sort of thing. But what I would say in the first place, as we've already seen from Lindsay's material, the way to measure GMOs is the greenhouse gases is still not that accurate, and there's a whole lot of questions about that. And I believe that we need to know from our sector point of view what are the outputs. And we need to understand how they arrive at those outputs. So you've got the ability to be able to manipulate them if we need to. So that's the first part. And I think there's the stages that you mentioned in terms of processing and transport and that sort of thing. We need to get a better understanding of that, and because I think it will be important. And I think it's the lack of information at the moment, which I personally find quite frustrating to understand how it works. And I think once and Lindsay's doing a great job in terms of getting his head round the overall process and keeping us informed on the on where it's all heading, and particularly with that He Wakareka Noa. Anything else to add to that?
Ian, you're not going to get out of here without answering one about the levies. Are we getting equal enough share spend on velvet and venison for levy? It seems that the velvet returns are growing like crazy, and the potential in the short term looks like that might be the way to reward the deer farmers. Are we getting enough spend there equally? And this is going to answer this one for me.
No, I'll give him a minute to think about it first. We've got quite a strict budgeting program within DINZ. So the process, in fact, will start virtually after this meeting, in preparation for the beginning of the 1st of October, which is the financial year. And so, in actual fact, Innes gets his team together and they work out where they think they need to be able to spend the money in terms of apart from just the running of DINZ, but also the promotional budget, which is a big chunk of it, which goes to velvet and to venison. And so those budgets are set well before we get to the beginning of the year. Hinging upon that is how we're going to fund those budgets. And I think it's reasonably well known that over the P2P program there were some reserves which have been used up, and then the rest of the funding has come from the levies. And I, for one, are quite strong about the fact that if you've planned to spend some money in whatever aspect we're dealing with, that's the only funding that's required. So the levy is set accordingly. We've never set the levy to put something in the back pocket for a rainy day. So I think that's certainly quite strictly controlled. And I think Innes will remember probably better than I do, but the balance between the velvet, the money spent in the velvet field and in comparison to the venison field is pretty much proportional to where the levies are collected, and it's reasonably equal.
Yeah, Tony was bang on just before. It's about 45% income from velvet, 55% from venison. Our expenditure is broadly in line with those income streams. Over the longer term, there's some yearly variation. Over the last couple of years, there's been substantial investment from DINZ into the Veltrack system. There is going to be a substantial amount going into the China development project. However, you are right that at the board, we had when we're looking at our 5-year budget, we see that velvet income is going to be increasing as venison income is likely to be dipping through that 5-year period. So there will be some questions around the allocation of those revenues over the next 5 years.
Can I just add just a little bit to that? It's been a bit of a chat around the board that now that, or if the trajectory of the velvet, money coming in and the leverage gained by that the composition of the board is slightly skewed towards venison. So it's something for the SAP to think about, and maybe even constitutionally later on, with only having Tony as one velvet processor on there. So it's just something to think about as they sort of, the velvet and the venison seem to be getting close to neck and neck. So something to think about.
Thank you very much. And I just reiterate right again that we always hear from the DINZ exec, and they like hearing from farmers or anybody who's got any comments, as do all the board members. We're very happy to be contacted at any time, any hour of the day or night. Doesn't worry me, to talk about any issues or queries and questions that you may have. So continue with that attitude. Thank you very much.